song. His name is Andrew Peterson. Some of you might know Andrew Peterson's music. If you don't know Andrew Peterson's music, I personally think he's one of the most creative contemporary writers and singers. And so I would encourage you to go to YouTube and look at a few of his pieces of music. But this is a kind of a strange little song he wrote about Matthew's Begats. So let me play it for you. If I can remember how to do this. That's not it. Okay. There it is. It's easier for him to say than it is for me to read it.
Abraham had Isaac.
A little bit more, please,
He had Jacob. Jacob, he had
Some of you
Judah
probably know
and
this song.
Well, then Perez and Zerah came from Judah's woman Tamar. Perez, he brought Hezron up, and then came Aram, then Amminadab, then Nahshon, who was then the dad of Salmon, who with Rahab fathered Boaz. Ruth, she married Boaz, who had Obed, who had Jesse. Jesse, he had David, who we know as king. David, he had Solomon by dead Uriah's wife. Solomon, well, you all know him. He had good old Rehoboam, followed by Abijah, who had Asa. Asa had Jehoshaphat, had Joram, had Uzziah, who had Jotham, then Ahaz, then Hezekiah. Followed by Manasseh, who had Amon, who was a man, who was father of a good boy named Josiah, who grandfathered Jehoiakim, who caused the Babylonian captivity because he was a liar. And then he had Shealtiel, who begat Zerubbabel, who had Abiud, who had Eliakim. Eliakim had Azer, who had Zadok, who had Achim. Achim was the father of Eliab. Then he had Eliezer, who had Mathan, who had Jacob. But listen very closely, I don't want to sing this twice. Jacob was the father of Joseph, husband of Mary, mother of Christ.
It's easier for him to say than me. Now let's be honest. What a gripping way to start the Gospel of Matthew. Said no one ever. I remember that many times when I've read the Gospel of Matthew, I start with Matthew 1:18. Because these first 17 verses are hard to read. Because, number one, they have all these strange names in them, and they're hard to say. But you have to wonder, what's the purpose? Now, there are also begats in Luke. You have two stories or two recordings of the genealogy of Jesus. And there are some differences. And I wish I had, the teacher in me would like to go through all the technical differences that make the difference between Matthew and Luke's recording. And at some point in time, your eyes would definitely glaze over. So let me just point out a couple differences. First off, Matthew takes the genealogy back to Abraham. But Luke takes the genealogy past Abraham all the way back to Adam. It's interesting that in Matthew's genealogy, he gives it in his gospel before the birth narrative. And Luke does his genealogy not before the birth, but after the baptism. So I think there are some very significant differences that's very interesting to see there's also one section of Luke and Matthew that are totally different. And it seems like they're actually tracing Jesus' genealogy in two ways. And so it's interesting to look at. But today what I want to do is I want to primarily look at Matthew. Some people think that Matthew is tracing Joseph's genealogy and Luke is tracing Mary's genealogy. But both of them take Jesus' genealogy, this family that Jesus was born into, takes his genealogy back to David. And so I want to look at Matthew and, believe it or not, look to see if we can gain some insights and maybe even, believe it or not, maybe even inspiration from looking at the Begats. What are the Begats? The Begats are, in essence, the genealogy of Jesus, his lineage, his pedigree. Now, that may not be as important to us today. Most of us don't know our lineage, although there are some fascinating things to be found out when you look at your heritage. And my own family line, we have traced back to Germany in the early 1800s. We know quite a bit about it because of the work of one of my aunts. But most people don't know a lot about their lineage. But in the ancient Hebrew culture, it was very, very important. And it was very, very, very important, especially to the priesthood. For a man to become a priest in ancient Israel, he had to be able to show on paper his lineage every step all the way back to Levi. And if a person could not produce that heritage, then they were unable to be a priest. He may actually have that unbroken heritage, but if they couldn't prove it on paper, he could not be a priest. And so the observant Jews took this very seriously. And so we have Matthew chapter 1, verse 1. It says, "The book of the generation of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham." Look what Matthew is really trying to do. He is trying to show that Jesus was the son of David and the son of Abraham. And so he traces all these genealogical records. Now, the fact is that the priests were very, very particular about doing this genealogy. The Sadducees the Sanhedrin was in charge of keeping track of all these births. And so you remember when Jesus was 8 years old, they took him to the temple for his circumcision, and also there they recorded his name. They enrolled his name on the rolls of the people of Israel. And so this was a very meticulous science. Now, I think it's interesting that at the time when Matthew and Luke would have written these genealogies, the genealogies were public knowledge. And so what I'm saying is that if Matthew had fudged on this genealogy, there would have been people who jumped up and said, "No, that's not true." But this is an exact genealogy of the family in which Jesus was born into. If Matthew is indeed a genealogy of his adopted father Joseph, there's no real blood here, but it's still his family. And so we have the family heritage of Jesus recorded in Matthew chapter 1. And notice it says that the book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. You have to understand the word son, in Hebrew, bar or ben. You have to understand the word is an expansive word. The word son may describe the relationship between a father and his immediate son, such as myself and Nathan, my son. So Nathan is the son of Frank. But the word son is very flexible. It's very expansive. And so it could also describe the relationship between a man who was 100 years old and his offspring 3 generations down. And in the case of Jesus, it says he is the son of David. Well, there are 50 or so generations between Abraham and between Jesus. And so the word son has some flexibility in it. And so here it shows that Jesus was a son of David and the son of Abraham. Now, this is the first purpose of this genealogy of Jesus. The first purpose of his genealogy is to show prophetically that Jesus is the Messiah. You know, Matthew loves to show many places. He loves to show how Jesus fulfilled prophecies. 12 times in the book of Matthew, Matthew uses this phrase, something like, this happened to fulfill what was written in the book of Matthew, or the book of Isaiah, or something like that. And so I want you to see that one purpose of the genealogy was to serve a prophetic purpose. Now, let me illustrate this by a couple other prophecies that Matthew talks about. In Matthew chapter 2, we have the story of the wise men. And Matthew 2:2, the wise men come to Jerusalem, say, where is he who is born King of the Jews? And the priests say, they told him, in Bethlehem of Judea, for so it is written by the prophet, and you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For out of you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. This was a messianic prophecy, and these priests are quoting, and Matthew is quoting from the Old Testament book of Micah chapter 5, verse 2. He's quoting, and that's the text you have there. And so you have this Old Testament passage that says that Jesus will be born, that the Messiah will be born in Bethlehem of Judah. Now, it's interesting that perhaps you've never heard that in the ancient world, in the time of Jesus, there were actually 2 Bethlehems. There was a Bethlehem in Galilee, and there was a Bethlehem in Judah, which is around Jerusalem. And so it doesn't just say Bethlehem. It's very fascinating. It says Bethlehem of Judah. And so you know what happened in Luke chapter 2, verse 4. It tells us that the Caesar made this decree that everyone must go to their town for the enrollment, and that Joseph, with his pregnant wife Mary, travels down to Bethlehem, and Jesus is born in Bethlehem. You know this part of the story. One has to question the wisdom of a man putting his wife on a donkey and traveling to Bethlehem. I'm not sure Mary had to be there, but I think Joseph was afraid to leave her in Bethlehem because this child was an illegitimate child. And so I think that there's a whole backstory behind why Joseph ends up taking Mary down to Bethlehem, and there Jesus is born. But there's something else significant about Bethlehem. It was called the city of David. It was David's city. And Jesus was to be the son of David. You know, it's prophetic on numerous levels that Jesus is born in Bethlehem. And Matthew takes great joy in pointing out how the Old Testament has been fulfilled in the birth of Jesus as he was born in the city of David. He was the son of David. We also have this passage in Isaiah 9, 6 and 7. If you don't remember the passage, just think of the Messiah. For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulders, and his name shall be called Wonderful, Counselor, the Mighty God, the Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace. Does anyone hear timpani like I do? The song. Of the increase of his government and peace, there shall be no end. Upon the throne of David and upon his kingdom, to order it and to establish it with justice with judgment and with justice from henceforth, even forever. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will perform this. Notice that in this messianic prophecy that foretells the coming of Jesus, it foretells the fact that he will sit on the throne of David. He's born in David's city. He will sit on the throne of David. And so what does Matthew want to do? He wants to give you this long list of names that most of us think are very boring. But he wants to give us a long list of names to show that prophetically Jesus fulfills this prophecy. He is the Son of David. But then it also says he is the son of Abraham. The Begats served to also tie Jesus to Abraham. Here's Genesis 12, verses 2 and 3. Here's a promise given to Abraham. And I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who curse you, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Here's a promise given to Abraham. But what Matthew wants you to know and what you need to understand is this is a prophetic passage, because it's not only talking about Abraham, it's talking about his descendants. And what does it say will happen with his descendants? It says that all the families of the earth shall be blessed because of his descendants. And that's Jesus. The whole world was blessed because of Jesus. And so I want you to see, first off, that the Begats trace Jesus' heritage so that those who followed the strict genealogical records could see that Jesus was the legitimate heir of all these promises that were given to Abraham and given to David. Jesus fulfilled those promises, and he can pass them along to us. The second thing I want you to see about Jesus' family tree, as we trace it through Joseph or Mary, is that there are some very interesting names on the family tree. Some very surprising names, shall I say. Jesus' family ancestors, the ancestors of his mother and father. The first group of people that I want you to know about that are on this family tree are a group of people that are unknown. They're in the Bible only in Matthew chapter 1. There are about 8 names, a group of names back down in verses 13 through 15. They start with Abiad and end with Mathan. They're unknown people. This whole section, we don't know these people except for these men, except for the fact that they're in Matthew 1. We don't find their names anywhere else in the Bible. We don't know their stories behind them. They are unknown to us. And yet, they're listed in Jesus' genealogy. And if that's not enough to make them important, nothing would. They're listed in Jesus' genealogy. Now, I want to apply this to us today. It's not only the well-known, upfront people who are essential to God's plan. Here are a group of men who we know nothing about, and yet Matthew records them in the genealogy of Jesus, showing that it's the people who are sometimes in the background, the unknowns, who are still serving God and still accomplishing the purpose of God just as much as the ones who are famous like David. So here we have these unknowns. Their work is essential to God's plan. And really, when you look at it, that's most of us. Most of us, our names will not go down in history. But your work for Jesus is just as essential as the Mark Finleys and the Ted Wilsons of the world. Our service to God as the unknowns is even greater because there's more of us. And it's up to us to determine if we want to cooperate with Jesus in accomplishing his task. And so I think it's very interesting to have the unknowns in the genealogy of Jesus. The second group I want you to know about are the heroes. There are some great people in Jesus' genealogy of his family, this family heritage, his family tree. Some great men: Abraham, Boaz, David, King Hezekiah, King Josiah, Zerubbabel, one of my favorite guys. I don't know if it's just because his name starts with Z. I don't know. I always teased my wife I wanted to name our son Zerubbabel. Zerubbabel Zolman. Don't you think it just rolls off your tongue? Yeah. Yeah. We ended up with Nathan. You can see who made that decision. Zerubbabel is a hero of the Old Testament. If you don't know about him, go back and read about him. I mean, you know all these are well-known men, and they're godly people. They're the heroes in Jesus' family tree, in his family heritage. There were heroes, godly men who did great things for God. But the third group of people that you find in Jesus' family tree are not heroes. They are zeros. Judah, listed right up there, right after Abraham. Judah, not a hero, not a good man. If I tell you his whole story, I will have to rate this sermon PG. Not a good man. David, he's kind of in both groups. Because there was a time period when David was not a good man. Manasseh, King Manasseh. King Manasseh was one of the most evil kings ever in the history of the kingdom of Judah. Ammon, Jeconiah. All of these men were evil kings, and when you read about them in 1st and 2nd Kings and 1st and 2nd Chronicles, it usually says about them, and they did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. These are evil men. Jesus not only had good examples in his family line, he had rascals, evil men, idol worshipers, adulterers. Now let's be honest. In all of our families, we've had a few of those. You know, we all have in-laws and we all have a few outlaws. People that when you talk about them at your Christmas dinner, people just shake their head. And we all have a few of those in our family history. And then in this genealogy, there's a fourth group of people that I want you to know about. This fourth group of people is very strange, very unusual. There's 4 names that are so unusual, they are never listed in ancient Jewish genealogical lists. And they are, women. Can you believe that Matthew would have the audacity to put a woman's name in the genealogical family tree of Jesus? And then they are there. But they're not just women. They are not Jewish women. They were not Jewish, which is like really scandalous. 4 women, all foreigners. 3 of them are involved in inappropriate sexual situations. 2 of them are prostitutes. And because I don't want parents to have to explain things on the way home in the car. I'll be careful. You'll be glad to know. But these are interesting women that are included in the genealogy of Jesus. First, we have Tamar. She is the daughter-in-law of Judah, who I just spoke of, who's not a very nice person. Judah ends up having children with her because she seduces him, because he has not been honest with her. And he has tried to keep her from producing children through the line. It's a very tainted story. And she's one of Jesus' ancestors in his family tree. Interesting story. Go back and read it. Book of Genesis. And the second one is Rahab. Rahab, the woman who helped the spies in Jericho. Do you remember? Rahab, who is identified as a prostitute. There are two words in Hebrew for prostitute. One describes one who is a so-called cultic prostitute or a sacred prostitute. She works at the temple, not the Jewish temple, the Canaanite temple. But the other is a word that describes a common prostitute, and that's what she was. And yet, when the Israelite spies come in, she protects them and she says, I've been looking at what's going on. I know you guys are going to win. Can you save me? And she and her family are the only ones who are saved when Jericho is destroyed. And she becomes an ancestor of this family line in which Jesus is born. This is amazing. Amazing. The third one is Ruth. Now, Ruth, you kind of like. Ruth is, when you read the story of Ruth, she becomes a heroine in the story. But Ruth had one major problem, and that is that Ruth was a Moabitess. She belonged to the kingdom of Moab. And in Deuteronomy chapter 23, verse 3, it says, no Moabite shall ever enter the assembly of the Lord, even to the 10th generation. I mean, she is a non-Jew. The Moabites are a hated race. You know, she should have been thrown out. And yet, she marries into the Jewish culture, and she becomes an ancestor of Jesus. An amazing story. She says this wonderful thing to her mother-in-law. Your place, your home will be my home. Your place will be my place. Your God will be my God. She becomes a heroine. She shouldn't be in the family history of Jesus, though, because not only is she a woman, but she's a Moabite. And then the fourth one, Bathsheba. The woman stolen by David and seduced from her husband Uriah the Hittite, and whom David had killed to hide his scandalous behavior, and then he married her. And she becomes the great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother of Jesus. I like to read a fellow named William Barclay, commentator, and he says this: if Matthew had ransacked the pages of the Old Testament for improbable candidates, he could not have discovered 4 more incredible ancestors for Jesus Christ. Matthew doesn't record Sarah and Rebecca, the good ones, but the ones who are a little sullied. Of course, you may have seen the old bumper sticker or the T-shirt that says, well-behaved women seldom make history. And here we have these women who are part of the family tree of Jesus, part of his earthly family heritage. when I look at these people who are in Jesus' family tree, I'm glad that we are not simply